Hey guys, Scott from the recordingsolution.com. Today I want to talk about the Scarlett Mix Control software that comes with a lot of the Focusrite interfaces. I think mainly all of them. But it's a third-party software that has a DSP chip. The interfaces have a DSP chip which allows you to cut down completely on the latency. And what latency is if you've ever tried to record, like say your vocals and you have your headphones on and you're hearing this like repeat or delay of a vocal, so like two vocals and the timing's off, so it feels like you're off, you can't get, it just feels like a double, so it's weird and it's hard to record like that. So that's what latency is. And so what that means is it goes, you sing into a mic, it goes through your mic cable into your audio interface, then it goes into your DAW of choice. Mine is Protools, or it could be Logic, Studio One, whatever. And then it's processed and then back out to your speakers or your headphones, and that's what you hear. Well, there's milliseconds of processing time for it to go through all those devices and software. So that's what you're hearing is once it's passed through there, you're hearing that delayed version of, for instance, your vocal. So what this software does, it lets you monitor right off the mics and bypass that processing. And if you plug in channel 1, you're going to hear exactly what's coming into channel 1 with no added delay or anything. So I want to explain how you set this up, and you can run monitor mixes and have your band each guy have their own mixes and all that good stuff. So right here is just, if you look at the top, mix 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's I can essentially have 8 mono mixes or 4 stereo mixes. And these are just the channels of your interface. So I have inputs. Right now I only have 8 actual mic inputs, and then I have SPDIF and ADAT. But just say we're using the 8 channels that you can actually plug a mic into or a guitar cable into. So right now you're seeing this. Well, I have the cable from my microphone plugged into channel 1 of my audio interface. So I have the input set to analog 1. Okay. And say you don't have anything recorded, you're on recording day, and say you're going to record vocals, drums, bass, and a guitar. So four people. So the vocal, let's say the vocal list is going to put on mix 1. So we want him to have a stereo headphone mix. So here's your channels of your analog inputs. Here is a blend knob, and here is your master fader of the overall, all the channels. So what this would be is if, say, you had like drums already recorded and then you're coming in to do the vocals. Well, if you had the drums already right here and you just wanted to hear the drums and have a control over the drums, how loud they are in the mix, well, that's what this would be. So I would set this to DAW 1, the outputs, DAW 1 and 2. Sorry, DAW. So now anything coming out of my Pro Tools rig, so I have a master fader here, and everything, all the drums that are recorded are dumping into this master fader. And then it's going out monitor left and right or 1 and 2. So that's DAW 1 and 2. And so I'm setting this to be DAW 1 and 2. So if I would play drums, if I would push play, you would hear the drums, and I could turn down the drums and keep the vocal. This is the main volume of the vocal that you're recording on that day. So you have analog 1. So this is what hasn't been recorded yet. I'm recording the vocal to drums that have already been recorded. So this is the way you could, like, if the drums are too loud, say you had a good drum mix in your DAW, you could turn the drums down here, turn the vocals up here, and then this is your overall master fader of this guy, the drums, and your vocal. So I hope that makes sense. But if you were recording everything on that day, you would set vocal here, so I could label that vocals. And I'm gonna make the mix 1 the vocal mix. So this would be for the headphone mix for the vocal guy. So vocals. And I want it to be a stereo mix so he can pan things where he want it in his headphone. So I'm gonna hit that. So now that changed it to mix 1 and 2. That was right there. Mix 1 and 2 that I changed the vocal. Well, I'm gonna make that a stereo mix. So I'm clicking that button right there. And these stay the same. So the kick, let's say the kick was channel 2. So I'm gonna label that kick. And he would be input on your audio interface channel 2. And let's say snare was channel 3. So say we just have kick and snare just to keep it simple. Well, now I could mix. So he just wants a little kick, about that much snare. And then let's say we have a bass guitar. Let me label that snare. Say we have a bass guitar here. He wants a little bass. And then say we have an electric guitar or acoustic. Well, let's do guitar. And he's got a little acoustic. We could pan the acoustic right. Keep the bass up the middle. Kick and snare up the middle. Or you can pan it wherever you want it. That's what these pan knobs are for, okay? And whatever the bass, if bass was in channel analog input 4 on your interface, you would go to input 4. And if the guitar, acoustic, or electric was input 5 on your interface, you would change that to input 5. So then you would monitor directly off your mics that you're miking that day, okay? And then down here is how you route it, okay? So if I'm in the control room, I have my 2 monitor speakers, my left and right monitor speakers. So I want to hear the DAW, what's coming out of my DAW Pro Tools. So I would set that to DAW 1 and DAW 2, which is left and right. Or you could set it, since we're recording all that day and there's nothing pre-recorded, in a minute I'll talk about why you need to mute everything you're recording on your DAW. But you would need to hear something, some kind of mix. So if you had DAW 1 and DAW 2 here, but there was nothing recorded yet, then you're pretty much not going to hear anything. So you could set this, you could set, instead of DAW 1 and DAW 2, you could go down to mixes and like use the vocal mix. So vocal left, vocal right, and then you would hear exactly what this vocal tab is hearing, what the vocalist is hearing. That way you can hear what they're doing. So I filmed this after I had already recorded it because I thought that was a little confusing. So back to the tutorial. Whoops. And then I have 2 headphone jacks in the front of my audio interface. So say the vocalist was on that first headphone jack. See these headphones right here? So that's my first headphone jack, these two options right here, and my second headphone jack, these 2 options right here. So on my Scarlett 18i20, it's already routed for me. They already assign output 7 and 8 is my left headphone jack, is my first one, and output 9 and 10 is for my second headphone jack. So if you can see here, it says vocal mix. Well, since I labeled these vocal, here's where I route the left and right stereo field. So I would go down to mixes. So here's our vocal mix, what you're seeing, all these faders right here, and how I adjusted the kick and the snare. Well, I want to make sure I'm hearing that mix for the guy that's plugged into this first headphone jack. So I would go to vocal left and then mix vocal right. So if he's plugged into that first jack, he's going to hear if I turn up or down the vocals, if I turn up or down the kick, if there was already kick, snare, bass, and guitar recorded, you wouldn't need to set these to anything. You could just keep them off. So say they're already recorded. And then when you hit play, you'll see, like you're seeing my vocal waveform right here. Well, you would see what's already recorded out of DAW, coming out of the DAW. And then you could blend the overall volume of the kick, snare, bass, and guitar that's already recorded. And then you have control over the vocal that you're recording that day as well. And then the master fader of all of it. So I hope that makes sense. And then say we wanted to make a new mix for a headphone mix. So say the drummer is in the second headphone jack on my interface. So I would go to mix 3, and you see how they all went to 0. So we haven't set his mix yet. So I want that to be a stereo mix, though, just like the vocal. So I'm going to go over here, click that. So now I have the first mix headphone for the vocalist, and this is for the drummer. So I'm going to label him drummer. So now I know when I click on that tab, this is this dude's mix. So again, if we were recording the drums and vocals that day, well, I would put the kick and the snare and assign them to their inputs that I have them plugged into the interface, and I could adjust his mix. And then I would assign, if he's in the second jack of my interface on the front, I want to make sure that he hears the drummer mix. So since we assign this drummer, it should be already labeled. So there it is. So drummer left, drummer right. So anything we do on this tab that's highlighted, he's going to hear that in his, okay? And if I'm in the control room, I'm still hearing how the DAW is mixed, the actual software. So I'm hearing what I want to hear, and they're hearing what they want to hear. And then if you needed more headphone mixes for the guitar player or for somebody else, well, on the back of your interface, if you have an 8-channel interface like me, this would be the actual physical line output 3 and 4. And then you would need a headphone amp. I have like a Behringer 2 or 4-channel headphone amp. So I would run 2 quarter-inch jacks, one out of line output 3 and one out of line output 4 into the headphone amp for the headphone inputs. And then on that headphone amp, you would plug in the third guy's headphones, and you would, so let's label his. So 5, let's make that guitar player. Let's make a bass player. And we want a stereo mix for him too. So say this was the bass player. So and he's plugged into the headphone amp that we just ran through outputs 3 and 4 out of the back of my interface into that headphone amp, and he would plug into that headphone amp. And for him to be able to hear himself, I would go to bass left, bass right, and now we can control his levels. Okay, if he wants more bass guitar and kick, since he's a bass player, you do that, and less vocals, you would do that and do his custom mix. And then let's say this is the guitar player, so let's do that, make it stereo, label it guitar player, and then he would be coming out of 5 and 6. You would need 2 cables, 2 quarter-inch cables, one coming out of 5, one coming out of 6 of the outputs on the back of your interface into the headphone amp. And then that guitar player plugs his headphones into the front of the headphone amp where there's another headphone jack. And you would want to make sure he can hear his mix. So guitar left, guitar right, and then here's his tab. It's highlighted. So you could adjust. You probably want more guitar, a little bass, little snare, little kick, and some vocals. So as I go through these tabs, you'll see the different mixes. So if the guitar player says, hey, can I get a little more guitar? You would switch to his guitar, turn his guitar up. That did not affect the bass player's mix. See, the guitar's still down here. He didn't want to hear that much guitar. He wants to hear more kick and his bass. And then the drummer has his mix, and the vocalist has his mix, okay? So that's how you set up the custom headphone mixes. Now, for a reverb, I had a hard time figuring out what if your vocalist wants a reverb? Well, the way I figured it out, and I'm sure there's different ways, all I did is set up So here's my vocal track. Oh, one more thing. This is very important. If you are monitoring, if you're recording that day, there's nothing pre-recorded, and you have the vocals, you have all the drums mic'd, the bass guitar, and you're all going into analog 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on your interface. Well, on your DAW, so say the vocal needs to hear himself, you need to mute the channels. So this is the vocal. You need to mute the vocal channel on your DAW so you don't hear it's two signals. So you don't want to hear the process signal that we talked about earlier. You just want to hear what's coming off the actual analog inputs of your interface. So to not be able to hear that repeat, you need to mute the channel. So if this was vocal and we were recording kick as well, I would mute kick, snare, and any bass. So that way you're only hearing these, because if you don't mute these channels, you're going to hear the channel coming right now that you're seeing move right here off the interface, and you're going to hear the repeat coming through your DAW, which takes those milliseconds of time to process that I talked about. So in order to hear no latency, mute these channels when you're recording, and you still be able to hear yourself and control yourself here. So that's very important. So now to the reverb. You're not going to be able to hear it because the screen capture software that I'm using only allows me 2 inputs. So if you can see here, my outputs, they're all not available, not available, not available. That's just because I'm routing to be able to record this screen flow. But if you weren't recording a screencast and you were just recording, here's my vocal track. And then I set up an aux track. And so what that is in Pro Tools, I would do Shift Command N, and I would create one. You can do stereo or mono, aux track, and then create. I'm gonna cancel that. Well, it did it again, but hide. And it would create this aux track that I labeled reverb. And then I set the output. I just picked line 7 and 8. It was available when I did it, but right now it's not. But it would be available if you're not recording a screencast. So I picked 7 and 8. You can pick 5 and 6. Any available output. And then I sent a send. I set up a send on the vocal to send to this verb track that I set up. So I set this track up. I put the input of this aux track to an open bus, and I labeled it verb. And then I sent a copy of the vocal that you're recording to that same track. So this copy is sending to this aux track we set up, and I put a reverb on there, okay? And I set it to 0, unity gain, and I hit pre-fader. So since we're muting this channel, the vocal, so you don't hear the latency, I want to still have a copy sent to this verb track. So I hit pre-fader. So that way when I mute this, the copy is still going there so we can still get that verb set up. So I hope you're still with me. So you have the vocal muted, a copy of it sent to this track that we set a verb on. The output of this verb track is going, just for instance, line 7 and 8. And then in the mix control software, I labeled a track here named verb. And I set the input, what I want it to monitor, to DAW 7. Because this is going out through 7 and 8, the reverb. So you're going to be able to bring it back in here through DAW 7. Because this is DAW, it's going out line 8, line 7 and 8 of the DAW. So I want to make sure I'm either on either DAW 7 or 8. And then that's how you would still hear. So right now you're not gonna be able to hear it, but if you were recording this, you could bring this up and you would hear that verb. So you could blend the verb to taste whatever, how much less or more verb the vocalist wants. So that's how I figured it out. I know it's kind of confusing, but just watch this video a couple times and you'll see what I'm talking about. Just make sure that the input of this DAW right here corresponds with the output of that verb track you set up. And that way you can, your singer's not just singing dry. So that's how I did it. And if sometimes you don't want to use this software and you just want to do your DAW software, well, you can go to this place right here and you can hit like DAW tracking and it'll lock up to what you have right here. And then I'm not gonna hit that because it'll correct everything I'm doing, but you would set DAW tracking and then it would route everything to where you're tracking from Pro Tools or whatever you're using. And then to make sure it stays that way and it's not messing up every time you reload Pro Tools or Logic or Studio One and it doesn't mess up your settings. So make sure you have it on DAW tracking and then go up to File on Mix, make sure on the Mix Control, and then Save to Hardware. So that means that would be like your preset. So say, man, I'm tired of, I don't even want to use this thing, it's confusing, blah, blah, blah. Well, make sure you hit DAW tracking, or vice versa if you're doing zero latency tracking, which is what we're doing, no delay, no latency, and we set up all our mixes. You would click it on that and then File, Save to Hardware. So every time you would fire up Pro Tools, that would pop up automatically with those settings, okay? So however you want to do it. So I hope this was not too confusing, and I hope you can watch this video and figure it out. And if you can't, you still have more questions, or if I didn't explain something well enough, you can email me at scott@therecordingsolution.com and ask me some more questions, and I will be happy to answer them the best I can. So again, this is just your faders, your individual mixes. If you already had something recorded, you would set this fader to monitor what's already recorded in your DAW. Set that to DAW 1 and DAW 2, and then you can blend in with the recording of your vocal that you're recording that day. And then this is the master fader of everything, and then here's your routing section, okay? So it's not that hard once you get your head wrapped around it, but I know it can be confusing because a lot of times, there's literally times where I sit here, I'm like, how do you do this again? And I have to just relearn it because maybe it's been a week or two that I've used it. So I wanted to shoot this video to help me as well, because when I teach things, it kind of burns into my memory, and I want to help y'all as well. So again, subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't yet. I got all kinds of free mixing tips and stuff, and it's not all technical like this. I also have a free ebook that you can get that talks about setting up a home studio and all the gear, budget gear that you can use to make very good quality recordings. And I have you'll be on my weekly email list where you'll get free training every week, and it'll help you out a lot. So again, Scott from therecordingsolution.com. We'll see you next time.